and welcome to another edition of Facebook Live here in the Office of Admission and the Office of Financial Aid on the campus of Texas Christian University. My name is Heath Einstein. I'm Dean of Admission and just ecstatic that you have joined us this evening. And I want to say hi to all of the many people who are out there. Hi to Patricia from Round Rock, to Elizabeth from Rockwall, to Stacy in New Braunfels. So we've got our Texas contingent. We've got Lori from Bakersfield and Alexander from Newport Beach, which is near my hometown of Fountain Valley, California. We've got folks from Staten Island, from Minnesota, and I saw Rebecca from Manila in the Philippines. That's awesome. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. We're thrilled that you are with us. Hey, Victoria, how are you?
I'm great, Heath. How are you?
I'm doing well. So Victoria Chen is our Director of Scholarship and Financial Aid, and she has joined me this evening for a very special edition of our monthly Facebook Live. We're going to be talking about scholarships and aid this evening. We know there is a lot of information that is sought out when it comes to how to afford college. And so we're going to talk to you tonight all about that. We start all of our programs with a land acknowledgement. Whether you are physically on our TCU campus or you are here with us spiritually, it's important to recognize where we are. So we talk about this. We respectfully acknowledge all Native American people who have lived on this land since time immemorial. And we're especially grateful and pay respect to the Wichita and affiliated tribes upon whose ancestral homeland our university is located. If you have been with us previously for one of these events, you know that we talk every month about a different topic. So in the past, we've done sessions on building your resume. We've done one on course selection. We've done one on the John V. Roach Honors College. I think this is the first time we are repeating a session. That's how important scholarship and aid is. We feel like we want to get as much information out to you as possible. These are unscripted hour-long sessions. So I'll have a few things to say. Victoria will have a few things to say. And mostly, we just want to answer your questions. So please go ahead and start now. You can start typing in any questions that you have into the comment section. We will get to as many of them as we can. I also want to start, before we begin, to thank a few people. We've got Amy Peterson from Marketing and Communication. We have Rob Berline from Alumni, and also Liz Rainwater here in Admissions, and Kyle Parsons from Financial Aid. All of those great people are working behind the scenes to make this work. So thanks to Amy, Rob, Liz, and Kyle. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about academic scholarships at TCU. That's always one of the just standard questions we get when we're visiting students in high schools or colleges or at a college fair. They want to know, what do I need to do to get a scholarship at TCU? The first thing you need to know is, for academic scholarship, there is no additional form that you need to fill out. Your application for admission serves as your application for an academic scholarship. When we are reviewing students for admission to the university, we are simultaneously looking at whether or not they would qualify for an academic scholarship. So what does that entail? How would one earn a scholarship? At some colleges, they will actually post on their website, they'll have a little grid. If you've got X GPA and Y test score, where those two cross, that's the scholarship you'll get. And that makes it easy for you to understand. We don't do that, but we don't do it because there's a little bit more nuance to our process. Namely, the curriculum that a student chooses really does make a difference. So we're not just looking at GPA. One of the questions we get is, well, wouldn't it make sense for me to take a bunch of easy classes just so I get straight A's? And the answer is not really, because we take note of your curriculum and you are going to earn points, so to speak, in our process for having an appropriately rigorous curriculum. So we're taking a combination of grades, test scores, if you choose to submit them, and I'll talk about that in a second, the curriculum rigor that the student chooses, and the high school that the student attends. So all of those factor in, and we are, when we're looking at a student's transcript, we're going to look pretty much at your core academic classes. So your GPA might be boosted because you've taken 4 years of PE, and while that's great, that's not really signifying to us that you're going to be a brilliant scholar. So we're going to take away those classes. We're going to focus on how you've done in your core academic subject areas over the course of 4 years. If you'll be applying in your senior year of high school. So we'll look at your grades through your first 3 years or 3.5 years, depending on when in the calendar you're applying. And we'll take note, certainly, of the courses that you have selected for your senior year. So all of that factors in. Then when you get your offer of admission, if you are going to get an academic scholarship, you will get it right then and there. So you'll know immediately if you've been awarded an academic scholarship. And those range, we have a range of academic scholarships that we offer, all the way up to full tuition for our chancellor scholars. Our chancellor scholars are our top scholars. That is one scholarship where you actually do need to interview for it, but those students will be invited to interview. So again, there's nothing that you need to fill out. Based on the student's application, we're going to take the very tippy top of the applicant pool and invite those students to interview for the Chancellor Scholarship. But you can see we start at the Founders Scholarship at $12,000 a year and go all the way up to full tuition. By the way, those dollar amounts that you see on the screen right now, that is the amount that we gave for those scholarship levels for students who applied in last year's process. Those numbers can change from year to year. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So it's possible that if you apply this year to start in the fall 23 semester, that if you get one of those scholarships, it might be a little bit more, but it might not be. So we haven't yet finalized our plans, but that is where we sit at this moment in time. You might wonder, and this is a common question, well, hey, why is it that when I applied to TCU, I got, a $12,000 a year scholarship, but I applied to another school and they gave me $20,000 a year? My credentials are the same. Why would the result be different? And the answer is because, number one, every college employs slightly different strategies when they're doling out their scholarship and aid dollars. Number two, schools have different budgets. One school might have more money to give away than another school does. And third, and perhaps most important, is the applicant pools are different. And so you might stand out in a way at one college where you don't stand out in another college in quite the same way. Doesn't mean you won't get a scholarship, but that can help account for some of those differences. I mentioned that standardized test scores might be taken into account when we're looking at you for scholarship. TCU employs something called a do no harm policy. And what the do no harm policy means is if you choose to submit test scores, they will not be used against you. Okay, so if you have, let's say you have an ACT score that for us is right in the profile, it's not going to help you or hurt you, you'll be fine. If you've got an ACT score that is above the profile of the typical admitted student, then that's a score that could help you in terms of admission to the university and in earning a scholarship. If your test score is below the profile, then we're simply going to ignore it. So if you're wondering, should I or shouldn't I, the answer is you're not going to be harmed, hence the do no harm name, by submitting your test scores. There are lots of students at TCU who get scholarships even without having submitted test scores or whose test scores were not taken into consideration when we were reviewing the students. Okay, Victoria, I know you have some words of wisdom to share about the need-based aid process, so I'll hand it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Heath. So I'm so excited to join you today on Facebook Live to discuss financial aid. And I recognize that this is a very special and exciting time for our students and families, and understand that it may be filled with a range of emotions from everyone involved. Those of you who joined Heath and I in previous year, you may remember that my youngest daughter, Emmy, was a rising junior in high school at that time. Well, she is currently a high school senior. Therefore, there are a whole lot of emotions in my household. So please know that my heart is with you in this exciting journey. As you explore college options, I anticipate that financial resources may be an important factor in your final decision and commitment for the next 4 years. In my 25 years in higher education and financial aid, I find that that it's not always easy to understand or navigate through this terrain, especially for families who are sending their first student to college. So my hope is that the information we share today will aid you in the formulation of questions to ask your college financial aid office, as well as help you plan ahead for the next 4 years. So during our time together, I would like to do three things: share a few terminologies that may be helpful in understanding financial aid, and also present a series of questions. And I noticed that a point that I will be discussing was generated in a question in the chat. So hopefully we'll be able to address some of those questions through my presentation. Also, lastly, this is a short time together, so I understand that financial aid is complex. If we're not able to get to your questions through the chat or through our discussion, please do not hesitate to reach out to our office. We have a magnificent team of staff who are ready to assist you. So let's begin. Cost of attendance is a terminology that you may want to get to know a little bit better. Is that COA is an estimate of the annual cost of a student's education. That's annual, that's 1 year. Components of the COA includes like tuition, fees, room, meals, transportation, and miscellaneous expenses. The Department of Education determines what can be included in the cost of attendance. Now, within the cost of attendance, there are two separate categories of costs that you might want to review closely. That's direct costs versus indirect costs. Direct costs includes education expenses that are billed or paid directly to the college. And that includes tuition, fees, room, and meals, as well as books, if books are supplied by the institution. Now, indirect costs applies to transportation, miscellaneous expenses, and other personal expenses. Now, the total indirect cost will vary from student to student. Therefore, budgeting is essential. Another terminology is net price. Net price refers to out-of-pocket costs. Net price can be calculated by taking the cost of attendance minus the total scholarship or grants offered. I would suggest using the direct cost component in calculating your net price, because this will make it easier to compare financial aid offers and out-of-pocket expenses among colleges that you apply to. Now, families may utilize a tool called the net price calculator to compare out-of-pocket expenses between the various colleges. We should be able to link to the net price calculator in our chat so that you'll be able to access it on TCU's website. But most financial aid offices will have, or most institutions will have net price calculator available for you to utilize. So these are a few basic financial aid terminologies to help you get started. We have a comprehensive list available on our website that you may wish to review. We will include that link in the chat as well. So let's discuss a few questions that may be helpful in your evaluation of financial resources. The first one is, what types of aid are available and what do we need to do to be considered for grant or scholarship funding? So the first part of this is the sources. Aid offers come from various sources, including private, foundations, federal, state, as well as institutions or colleges. Now, aid offer may include academic scholarship, need-based scholarships, and/or grants, as well as self-help programs, which would be your work study and loans. Now, specific program details are available on the TCU Financial Aid website, and it's financialaid.tcu.edu. We'll include that in the chat as well. How are students considered for these grants and need-based scholarship, as well as self-help programs? There are two types of applications that TCU utilizes, and other schools may use additional applications. The first application is the FAFSA, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is administered by the U.S. Department of Education, and it opens up October 1 each year. Now, the result of the FAFSA is shared with schools that are designated by the student, and this information is used to determine federal and state aid. Texas residents who are ineligible to complete the FAFSA may complete the TASFA, and we'll link to both the TASFA and FAFSA on our financial aid website, so that information will be available for you as well. In addition to federal and state grant funds, universities and colleges may also offer institutional aid. To ensure that available funding is allocated strategically to help meet our enrollment goals, a number of schools may utilize a separate application besides the FAFSA. TCU requires the submission of the CSS profile for consideration of institutional need-based aid. This application is administered by the College Board. The CSS application is a little bit different from the FAFSA in that it provides a comprehensive view of a family's finance, as it takes into consideration income, asset, age of parent, demographic, home value, and also protects certain income and asset as parents come closer to retirement age. Now, the data reported helps us to better understand a family's financial need and offer support where we're able to. It also allows for the sharing of special situation, which may affect the family's ability to assist with students' college costs. Now, the important takeaway on the CSS profile or alternate applications that school utilizes, it provides access to institution funds, which will help lower the net price. And as I mentioned, net price is basically out-of-pocket cost. An institution with a higher cost may offer more aid, which in essence may lower your overall net price to a comparable amount. Therefore, I would suggest you not eliminate an institution from your list of prospective colleges based on the sticker price or cost of attendance alone. So the next question is, our family's income is too high. Should our student apply for financial aid? I highly recommend you file for aid at least once for many reasons. Applying for aid gives your student the opportunity to be evaluated for available resources. Scholarship donors, for example, both internal and external, may have specific criteria for their scholarship fund. This can include non-need-based components such as a student is from a single-family household, the parent's education level, certain demographics, or information that is only available through the aid application. An example, for several years ago, we received a generous gift from a donor, which allowed TCU to allocate aid to families who fell outside of the financial need range. And considerations were made to students who applied for aid. So keep in mind that at least submit the application one time. Also, during the pandemic, colleges were allocated federal relief funds to assist students who were impacted by the pandemic. Priority was given to students who submitted an aid application. So things happen, life-altering situations such as loss of income, separation or divorce, a pandemic. These events may affect a family's ability to support their student, and having an aid application on file will allow the financial aid office to review these special circumstances and possibly use professional judgment to assist families in times of need. We understand that filing for aid may result in the offer of loans only. Admittedly, this is a difficult topic. Loans are valuable resources to many of our students and families who are unable to supplement their personal income or asset toward college costs. Now, responsible borrowing is important to TCU. We are very intentional in advising our students toward responsible borrowing and loan debt. So whenever we're able to, we will offer funding to reduce loan debt for our students. Granted, decisions regarding the assumption of debt is very personal, and it depends on each and every family situation. My advice regarding college costs is to have that open conversation with your student early on regarding finances. What are your family willing to commit to? What are the expectations for your student? Outline these goals for 4 years and not just one. This will help to minimize financial stress, allow your student to focus on academic and student experience. I did see another question regarding what initiatives are in place to encourage diversity. Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are extremely important to TCU. There are regulatory limits to utilizing race and ethnicity in the admission and aid consideration. We take great care in reviewing students' individual needs and offer assistance as much as we can based on fund availability. The next question is, will my financial aid be renewed each year? Most TCU academic and need-based scholarships are offered up to 8 semesters, as long as the student meets the renewal criteria. Now, grant and need-based scholarship require the submission of the FAFSA annually, and we do require submission of the FAFSA by May 1st. The CSS profile is just required for the first year's determination of aid, but the FAFSA is required for subsequent years. As long as there are no major changes to the FAFSA data from the previous years, grants and need-based scholarships will remain the same. So please have your student check with our office if they have questions or concerns about meeting renewal requirements. We're here to help answer any questions you or they might have. Now, I understand that the information presented may seem like information overload, and I hope what we share today at least provide you with enough data and speaking points for those conversations with college financial aid administrators. For TCU, we also recognize that our student families may have unique situations and circumstances that may need individualized attention. Therefore, please do not hesitate to reach out to me or to my team for assistance. So we can head on to any questions that I have not covered in that really quick presentation.
Victoria, that was so thorough. And yet we do have a lot of questions, which is great. I love that we have such an eager and enthusiastic audience with us tonight. I wanted to underscore one point you made just a second ago about the importance of parents, guardians, and their students having that conversation in advance, because I'll tell you, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself more than I have, the most heartbreaking conversations that we have with students in admissions aren't with the students who don't get admitted, although admittedly, no pun intended, those aren't fun. But the most heartbreaking conversations are the students who have been admitted but can't make it work financially. And their dreams of attending the university are right there in front of them, and they feel like they're forced to go somewhere else. And so I think part of that heartache can be alleviated by having a transparent conversation between caretaker and student, so that up front exactly what is going to be expected, and if you're going to have to earn a scholarship or contribute some of your own dollars, in this case being the student, I think that can be really helpful. Okay, so let's get to some questions. Kathy asks, are there any special scholarships for student ambassadors or student government officers? And so I want to answer this in a couple of different ways, because you could be asking this, Kathy, from the perspective of, if a student has been involved in those things in high school, are there special sort of leadership awards? And we typically will give scholarships to students for their academic accolades. We're not factoring in their leadership when we're giving out scholarships. However, there are lots of scholarships that are available to TCU students, returning TCU students, for a lot of different things. And so, Victoria, do you want to talk about sort of these, what we call special eligibility scholarships?
Absolutely. If you go to financialaid.tcu.edu, there is a link to special eligibility scholarship. We have a scholarship portal called the Horned Frog Scholar Search that is available to our students. There is a general application available each year. I would recommend that your student go in there, at least complete the general application, and then review the availability of other scholarships out there. Periodically, additional scholarships will come up. We receive donors funding throughout the year. It may be a one-time award that comes up, in the middle of the semester that your student might want to be considered for. But the Horned Frog Scholar Search portal is where your students should start, just to review all those scholarship opportunities and review that every year periodically throughout the year.
And I will give you a heads up that we do have scholarships specifically for those who've been involved in Student Government Association. So that's a great question. Okay, let's see. Rebecca asks, are there any majors that are more likely to get funded via academic or merit scholarships? This is such an insightful question. And Rebecca, I would answer that by saying, maybe, but you're not going to know, and it could change from year to year. So we go into our cycle, and you've caught us on a perfect day, because Victoria and I were in meetings all day talking about strategy for the upcoming year. And we have not determined if any majors are going to be targeted specifically, so I don't have that answer for you. But we do think about, okay, what does the makeup, what does the composition of our class look like? Are there opportunities for us to incentivize one major or another, depending on what the demand is in those areas? So the answer is maybe, but again, there's not a consistent from year to year. It's going to be, this major consistently. So, but it's a great question.
Great question.
Okay, Tanya asks, do you foresee any increase in housing and tuition costs? And I would suggest yes. It is very likely that you'll see some increases in housing and tuition costs from year to year. And you should factor that in as you're trying to budget, not just for year one, but over the course of 4 years. It changes. It's not the same percentage every year, and it's not a guarantee that it's going to change. But most colleges, and TCU is included in that, will increase, a few percentage points each year, and that comes out. We usually will have that new tuition at some point announced at some point early in the spring semester. It requires approval of the Board of Trustees, and they meet periodically. Okay, Georgette asks, my daughter is planning on applying for early decision. We're from California. We will be applying for FAFSA. Will TCU go by the FAFSA application to make or weigh in financial aid for merit scholarships TCU has to offer? Will you also be considering SAT for admissions consideration? Okay, lots of questions in there, Georgette, and these are great questions. First, I want to define early decision because everyone watching might not know what that means. Early decision is a binding application. That is a student saying TCU is my number one school, and I'm so committed to attending that I actually will guarantee that I will enroll if you offer me admission and withdraw my applications from every other school. So that's a very serious commitment. You should only apply early decision if you absolutely know this is where you want to be. For some families, they might feel like TCU is the top choice, but the financial aid is going to be such a strong determining factor that they don't want to commit early without knowing what their aid package is going to be. Because while you will still get an aid offer just as you would if you applied any other time, assuming you qualify, you're not going to know that until after you've been admitted to the university. So the first thing I would say is if your decision will be determined by the financial aid award, then you should think about early action, which is a non-binding application versus early decision. However, we have many students who apply early decision, are admitted to the university, and get financial aid. We don't treat those students differently. And I want to specify in particular the scholarship process, because every year, and I feel like I'm getting this question increasingly, I will have students and parents ask, well, aren't you going to not give me a scholarship if I apply early decision because you know I'm coming? And it's a perfectly logical question to ask. However, we believe strongly that that would be unethical of us to not give a student a scholarship if their credentials have merited a scholarship. So you're going to get the same scholarship in early decision as you would any other time. But yes, Victoria, do you want to talk about the process, if there are any differences at all from a financial aid perspective when a student applies early decision versus at some other point in the calendar, how that works?
In terms of the application, no, there is no difference in terms of submission. So make sure I recognize that FAFSA is pointed out, but for institutional aid, the CSS profile is also available October 1st. And both of those applications would need to be on file for consideration of institutional aid. If you apply for FAFSA only, then we will look at federal and state funding, but institutional aid requires the CSS profile.
Excellent. Okay, Victoria, it's time for a break. And we're gonna do our first dad joke of the night. Okay, so I'm going to ask a dad joke, and you have, if you know the answer, you can answer it, but don't feel pressured. You don't have to. Okay, what is the most popular fish in the ocean? What is the most popular fish in the ocean?
I will have to contact a friend.
Okay. Okay.
Kyle.
You should know this.
Popular fish.
You should know this because you are one. You are a star. And so a starfish is the most popular fish in the ocean. Okay. Now, back to our questions. Crystal asks a really good question, so I'm going to pose this to you. How to handle divorced parents, where one does not plan to assist at all financially with college when applying for aid. Do we still need to get him to report his financial information? We get, I know you guys get this question a lot when we have a student who doesn't live with both parents at the same time. Maybe they split time, or maybe they're only with one parent. There's so many different permutations when it comes to divorced families. So how would you advise, Crystal?
Hi, Crystal. Yes, we do require both parents' information on the FAFSA. So we have a custodial parent application for the CSS profile, but we also have a non-custodial parent that application as well. The information provided by the non-custodial parent will not be seen by the custodial parent. So if there's concerns there, just make sure that that information is related to the other party. But we do require both parents' information on the CSS profile.
Excellent. Okay, Georgette asks a really good question that has to do with you mentioned earlier the net price calculator.
Yes.
So Georgette says that we did the calculator for early decision. Are those quotes on the calculator accurate to what a student would be potentially receiving? This is another really interesting question. And colleges,
Right.
we try to do the best we can, but it's not necessarily going to be to the dollar amount. So can you walk us through how that net price calculator actually works?
Absolutely, Georgette. The information provided on the net price calculator will give you an estimate of the aid that your student is eligible for. But the estimate is as good as the information that you provide us. And so remember that if there are certain items that you haven't reported on the net price calculator, when we receive the FAFSA and CSS profile, the result may be a little bit different, but it does give you a pretty good estimate of the aid eligibility for your student.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. Maria asks, if your high school does not calculate GPA, does that hurt you? And I'm guessing that means you should definitely submit test scores. Well, Maria, not necessarily. See, what we will do, whether or not your school provides a GPA, is we're going to recalculate the GPA, or in the case of your student, calculate it. So if they have any indication on the transcript of what their grades are, we're going to take those grades and convert it to a standard 4-point scale, remove any weighting that the school would have provided so that everybody's looked at in the same way. And remember earlier, I talked about curriculum rigor. So for students who have taken some advanced courses, that's where you're going to sort of get credit, so to speak. So you're not harmed by the fact that we're taking out weighting, because it'll be factored in a different part of our calculation. It doesn't mean you should or shouldn't submit test scores. That is, again, entirely up to the student. If the student believes that those test scores are a good reflection of their abilities and their potential, then great. And again, there's no downside to submitting it, because if we don't feel like it's going to be useful for us, we're just going to ignore it. But the fact that the high school itself doesn't calculate a GPA is fine, because we're gonna do that for you. Okay, Victoria Bethan asks, do you provide scholarships for nationally recognized Indigenous scholars as determined by the College Board?
Yes, we do. We do. As long as your student has received a confirmation from the College Board, if you would please forward that to our office, students will receive $2,000 on top of their academic scholarship.
Okay, so to be clear, that is stackable?
That is stackable, yes.
Okay, that's excellent. Okay, Anna asks, how do we change the option to use test scores if you've already applied? And the answer is, Anna, when you go into the portal, or when your student goes into the portal, there's going to be an option on the right-hand side to update your test score answer to the test score question. So you actually can opt in or out. There will come a point at which we don't allow you to do that anymore, but certainly up to the point of the deadline, which is November 1st, a student can change their answer to that question. So that's an excellent question. Okay, Mike asks, how many of the merit scholarships are given to the freshman class? Victoria, do you know off the top of your head, as a rough proportion, what percentage of our first year class got scholarships. I think it's more than half this year. I could be wrong about
Probably
that.
more than half. I don't
Yeah.
have the information on hand, but we can follow up with you on that.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks. So actually, that's a great question.
That's a great question.
Mike. And if you want to follow up, if anyone wants to follow up with us directly, the email address for the admission office is frogmail, FROGMAIL, at tcu.edu. And Victoria, is it FinAid?
FinAid@tcu.edu.
Yeah. So FINAID, FinAid at tcu.edu if you've got questions for the financial aid office. Okay.
If I may share, just a follow up to that question, just to give you an idea, over 80% of our student population receives some type of aid. This past year, we offered, for our incoming students, we offered over $74 million in institutional aid. So just roughly gives you an idea.
Yep, absolutely. The other thing, I don't know if we mentioned this earlier. I know we did talk about the search engine. There are some special scholarships that students get, even as incoming students, that they'd be eligible for. For example, we give $3,000 for any student who's in the marching band. You don't have to be a music major to do that. And so if you've been playing a marching band instrument throughout high school, absolutely, this is something you might consider continuing. And I will say, I remember having a conversation with our director of bands years ago. There are many students who do marching band in high school, and it is such a big time commitment that they don't want to do it in college, not realizing that the time commitment actually is much less in college than it is in high school. So if you have been playing an instrument for a long time, you might consider it. And if not, if you haven't been playing an instrument for a long time, you might want to pick up an instrument now, because you can get $3,000 for being in the marching band. And then performance-based scholarships. So that goes for our Division I athletes and many of our artists. So think about the fine and performing arts. We offer scholarships for dance and music and theater and so forth. So there are other scholarship opportunities as well. Okay, Kathy asks, are there transfer scholarships for students who choose community college first? And how is admission different if a student chooses that route? So Victoria, do you want to talk about the process for transfer students in terms of scholarships?
In terms of scholarship, academic scholarship for transfer student are available through the admission process as well, very similar to incoming first year students. In terms of federal and state and institutional aid, the need-based scholarship requires the CSS profile in addition to the FAFSA.
Typically, for admission to the university, depending on major, for students who are transferring, whether it's from a 2-year or 4-year college, we would need to see a minimum of a 2.75 GPA. And again, that could shift a little bit depending on the major. Scholarships typically start at about 3.25. So, but you can see that listed on our website. We're very transparent about that. And there is quite a bit of money to give away for our students who are applying to transfer to the university. We are a transfer-friendly institution, and each year we will welcome roughly 400 transfer students in the fall semester, another 100 to 125 in the spring semester, and the credits transfer fairly easily. So that's something we definitely you'll want to be on the lookout for, and you want to contact our transfer team here in the Office of Admission for some more information on that. Okay, let's see. I think you already answered that question about the profile. Okay, Denise asks, what kind of scholarships are offered for out-of-state applicants? So generally, I would say, Victoria, are there differences for in-state versus out-of-state students?
No, there's no difference. In terms of the application process, it's exactly the same. Our special eligibility scholarship, there might be a distinction in terms of demographic, where the student's from, but those are criteria that are set based on the specific scholarships.
Great. Okay, John asks, does financial aid received by the federal government affect any aid by the school and vice versa?
Does financial aid received by the federal government?
So I guess institutional versus the public funds. How do we work that? How do we decide which pot of money you're getting from?
So generally, most of the funding from the FAFSA or the federal government is determined based on the FAFSA, and those are awarded upfront to students, and then stacked upon, on top of that would be institutional aid or state funding.
Right. So if a student has $10,000 in need and the government covers 5,000 of that, that's where we're going to kick back the other, or
Right.
fill in the gap of 5,000 with institutional funds, something like that.
Yes.
Awesome.
Right.
Okay, we've had several questions in here from folks about the Chancellor Scholarship process. I think since I mentioned it, that triggered some questions. And so that folks know, the first step is the students who are selected to interview for the Chancellor Scholarship. That will almost always come from our pool of students who are applying in the early decision or early action round. The reason for that is our Chancellor Scholars Weekend is usually sometime in the middle of February. In order to be able to invite students for that and to give them adequate time to prepare their travel, we need to notify those students sometime in December or early January, depending on the student. So if you wait until to apply by our February 1 deadline, more likely than not, you're going to miss the boat on that. So if you're even thinking about wanting to compete for the Chancellor Scholarship, November 1 is that deadline that you're going to want to hit. And if a student receives the Chancellor Scholarship, that covers tuition, full tuition. It's not the full cost of attendance that Victoria mentioned earlier. It's the tuition alone, which is still a pretty big sum of money. And that will be good for the duration of their undergraduate experience. Those are only awarded to students who are coming to the university. So once you're a student here, you can't then compete for a Chancellor Scholarship. Okay. And we offer those for students who are incoming first-year students, as well as a handful of transfer students as well. Okay, let's see. Chris asks, how are appeals processed? And so I'm going to, I'll take that. There are two kinds of appeals. One could be an admission appeal. I think you're asking, Chris, about financial aid, but I'll answer in case people are wondering about admission appeals. When we make our offer of admission, of course, there are also students who are not offered admission, unfortunately, because we don't have space to admit everybody. Students occasionally will choose to appeal that decision, and that would come to me. We don't encourage students doing that because it will almost never reverse the decision. First of all, we work really, really hard to get it right the first time. But second of all, presumably all of the relevant information would have come in the application the first time around. So unless something drastic has changed between the point of application and the point that the decision was rendered, we're not going to overturn that decision. Okay, but Chris, you were probably asking about financial aid appeals. So Victoria, how does that work?
Hi, Chris. So there is an appeal process for what we can consider as special circumstances. We recognize that there are changes. Sometimes the FAFSA and CSS profile doesn't really reflect your current situation. So indeed, there is an appeal process. Please reach out to our staff in our office so that we can help you navigate through that. Sometimes the appeal will be very limited based on certain situations. And so when you file the appeal, it might not result in substantial increase in financial aid. We don't want to take you through a long, drawn out process for that to just result in no increase to your students' financial aid. So please reach out to our office. Let us assess your situation and advise you accordingly.
Excellent. Okay, Victoria, Barbara asks, can TCU scholarships be layered with an ROTC scholarship? Or if awarded an ROTC award, are other awards removed? This is a really good question. So TCU offers both Army and Air Force ROTC. There's some differences there. The number of years covered can be different, the amount. So can you walk us through how that works?
Hi, Barbara. So yes, to a certain extent. ROTC scholarship generally covers full tuition. TCU supplements the room and board piece of that for scholarships, for scholars who are accepted into the program. And there are certain requirements to be eligible for the room and board grant. And I would suggest that you contact the ROTC office, because generally recommendation will come from ROTC to the financial aid office for a room and board grant. The room and board piece is stackable. Now, if there's an academic scholarship out there, that academic scholarship is tuition based and cannot be stacked with the ROTC scholarship.
Great, thank you. Okay, Ariana asks, if a student graduates from high school with an associate's degree as well, is that taken into consideration when the application is being reviewed? Yes, Ariana, we do take that into consideration, that you've taken college level work. However, it's important to know that you would not be considered a transfer student. Because you are taking those classes concurrently, and you'll be coming to us directly after having completed high school, even if it's with an associate's degree, in our process, in our review process, you'll be reviewed with other incoming first-year students, and you would still have the residency requirement of any incoming first-year student at TCU, meaning you would have to live on campus, and I think you'd want to live on campus for 2 years. You can do that even having some advanced standing. So you could theoretically start as let's say a sophomore credit-wise, live on campus for 2 years, and then graduate in year 3. So it's a little bit of both. And I know that can be a little confusing, but we would treat you for admission purposes as a first-year student, but taking that associate's degree into consideration. Okay, Victoria, Chris asks another great question. Chris is on a roll tonight. If a student earns scholarships on their own, will the TCU scholarships be decreased and other financial aid reduced?
So external scholarships from outside foundations are countable resources. It is countable against a student's financial need. That is actually part of the federal requirement to count all resources a student may receive during their time in college. So yes, there is a possibility that it may impact need-based aid. However, we generally begin with reducing need-based loans, self-help awards, work study, before we will reduce grant funding. But there may be an impact to the student's need-based aid. So please contact our office. We can, again, walk you through that.
Okay. Cindy asked a question. What if the non-parent can be found? I think she means can't be found. What if the non-custodial parent can't be located? What is the process like then?
We do have a waiver for the NPC information, non-custodial parent information. So please contact our office. We will request some documentation and for you or your student to provide us additional information so that we may assess your situation further. Yes.
Great. Okay, Kelly asks, is family support considered? My husband has relatives in Venezuela that we financially support, and that impacts our budget, obviously. How do we take that into account, or do we take that into account?
We don't, Kelly, take that into account. I recognize, because I grew up in an extended family and things like that, but some of that aspect is considered a choice for families to have the ability to assist their relatives, etc. But that is not something that TCU will consider.
Okay, we're going to pause for one more dad joke. Victoria, I'm not going to put you on the spot.
Okay, good.
You can shout out the answer if you know it immediately.
Okay.
But I'll just ask it away. When does a joke become a dad joke? When it becomes apparent. Okay. So next, we're going to go back to
you.
You didn't seem like that facial expression doesn't suggest that you actually thought it was cute.
It's cute.
Okay. Okay. Lola asks, how would I go about filling out FAFSA if income has changed since 2020? How should that be reported to the school? So we've got this thing that we still use prior year. Is that right?
We use prior year. So
prior year being 2020, but now income has changed. How do we take that into account?
So I would suggest go ahead and filling out your FAFSA based on the 2020 information. We have a process for reviewing your special circumstances, your situation, that we can go back and evaluate your current situation and update the FAFSA on your behalf. But it is a separate process. You do need to first submit the FAFSA with the 2020 information.
Great. Thank you. Okay, Liz asks, what happens if you interview for the Chancellor Scholarship but do not receive it? Do you get the lower level scholarship? Every student who is interviewing for the Chancellor Scholarship automatically will start at a Dean Scholarship level. So you will find that out as you're being invited to the Chancellor Scholarship. So you would, yes, you will absolutely have a scholarship if you are a strong enough student to be competing for the Chancellors. Okay, Ayan asks, can you receive scholarships after you get into TCU and you perform well? So do you want to talk, Victoria, about the Academic Achievement Award?
So for students who were not offered an academic scholarship as an incoming student, there is an opportunity to be evaluated in the second year. So at the end of the first year, we will look at students with the highest GPA and offer an academic scholarship too. We generally offer from 30 to 50 of those scholarships to returning students. So yes, there is an opportunity to be evaluated based on your TCU credentials.
Okay, Lauren asks, if my son's father passed away, do we list his stepdad on FAFSA or both?
You would list the stepfather on the FAFSA, and then on the CSS profile, though, because that's when we're asking for both parents' information, you would request a waiver, or if you answer the question that your husband, your ex-husband is deceased, then that information will not be required.
Okay. Cindy asks, do I need to wait till my daughter is accepted? And I think she means to apply for financial aid. So can you walk through? I know you mentioned that the forms open up October 1st. Is a student supposed to wait until they hear back from us, or what would you recommend?
Please don't wait. The FAFSA is available for filing as of October 1st. So go ahead and submit that. Students can add schools to receive that information at a later date. So I would suggest go ahead and even including TCU in there, not waiting until your student is admitted, because then once your student's admitted, we'll be able to load that information and determine financial aid.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, May asks, for international students, I understand that we can apply to CSS. However, for those that are older than 26 years old and do not have a social security number, how will you evaluate these students? So, yeah, can you talk about just generally how we evaluate international students?
So the CSS profile is available to international student. A social security number is not required for filing of the CSS profile. So for our international student, the CSS profile would be the application that we would utilize to determine your need-based aid.
Great. Victoria, I'm wondering if you can talk about the verification process, how some students are selected for verification. Why is that, and what does that mean, and how is a family supposed to proceed?
In terms of the federal verification process, students completing the FAFSA periodically will be selected for the review process by the Department of Education, or who we call the federal processor. And so some of the information that you report on the FAFSA may need additional documentation. And so our office will request that information from you. My suggestion when you complete the FAFSA is to utilize the IRS data retrieval. This will provide us an opportunity to not have to request additional tax information from you, because that is a direct link from the IRS to the FAFSA. So there are certain aspects of when a student is selected. Some of those metrics are not disclosed to schools. Sometimes it's a student who are Pell eligible. Sometimes your reported income has some conflicting aspect in there. Your household size seems a little bit different. Things like that could trigger a selection for verification, for a federal verification. But we are required to complete verification for the most part. This past year with the pandemic, verification was waived for a lot of families, but this upcoming year we do not have that information yet to go on. So definitely verification. If you're selected, please pay attention to the information that we're requesting from you so that we can speed up that process.
Thank you. Alexander asks, can senior year grades be used to compute scholarship merit money? The answer, Alexander, is yes, potentially. So depending on when the student submits an application, it could be considered. Let's say a student applies by our February 1st deadline. We will look at a student's first semester grades as we're calculating the GPA, and that will be considered as part of our academic scholarship evaluation. If a student applies early and we're looking at their grades through the first 3 years of high school, of course, we wouldn't yet have their first semester grades, and we admit them. It's possible for a student then to communicate with us and request that we reevaluate them for scholarship or for additional scholarship if they initially received one using first semester grades. I will tell you candidly that most frequently that doesn't change the scholarship, even if you have straight A's, because you're adding 1 semester's worth of grades to 6 semesters worth of grades that are already there. And even strong grades typically won't change your cumulative GPA all that much. So you can request that we look at that. What we will not do, what we don't do, is after you're done with high school, let's say once we hit your final transcript, then go back and recalculate, because you can imagine everyone would ask that we do that, and we don't have the resources to be able to do that. And we don't budget on something like that. We know that we have a certain amount of money to give, and once that pot of money is sort of given away, that's it. So we will look at it through the 7th semester of high school. Andrea asks, when recalculating GPA, do you only use the 5 core classes, or do you include all? And in that scenario, would a B plus be considered a 3.5? Okay, excellent questions. So we're using a 4-point scale, and we're not factoring in pluses and minuses. So B plus would be a 3, a B minus would be a 3, a B would be a 3. Anything in the B range would do that. And yes, we're looking at your 5 core classes, that being English, math, history, science, and languages other than English. We do take into account some other academic classes. If you took AP Studio Art, for example, which I can tell you, having worked in high schools, that is a highly rigorous course, we would count something like that. If you take religion classes, of course, Texas Christian University being a religiously affiliated institution, we look at religion classes that a student would have taken in high school. So there are some elective classes that we look at. Primarily, though, it's those 5 core academic subject areas. Okay, we are just now coming up on the hour. And so I just wanted, Victoria, first of all, to thank you for giving of your evening with us, and ask if there were any sort of pearls of wisdom you wanted to leave folks with before we say goodnight.
The only suggestion that I definitely would like for you to leave our conversation is to complete your aid application early. Don't wait. Give us the opportunity, give schools the opportunity to evaluate your students for all the resources available. Don't wait until the last minute. Don't wait until your student's admitted, because sometimes that is, it may prolong additional information that's requested. And I understand that it's just a lot of information. Please reach out to the financial aid office, reach out to me, reach out to our team. If you need assistance, if you have follow-up questions, if your questions were not answered via our chat, via live, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Victoria. I really appreciate you being with us, and always appreciate your partnership and your friendship. So thanks so much. It was great to be with you all this evening. Join us next month when the topic is going to be application tips, because when we see you 1 month from now, we will be less than a month from the November 1st deadline. As hard as that is to believe, it feels like the school year just started. So wishing everyone a wonderful evening, and go Frogs.
Go Frogs.